So one of the things that I've been, actually, the only thing I've been working on for the last 3 years is working with someone who has influenced my thinking more than anyone else, which is Dr. Stephen Spear from the MIT Sloan School of Business. And on the next slide, I'll share with you where I met him, which is in 2014, when I took an executive education course because I had read his book, The High Velocity Edge. And it made me rethink and see things I had just never thought of before. And, although Anna, our editor, would probably dispute this, but I personally blame Steve for the DevOps handbook being over a year late because, I knew it had to be rewritten. And so what we've been working on for the last 3 years is really try to understand what is in common between Agile, DevOps, the Toyota production system, safety engineering, resilience engineering, psychological safety, and so forth. And the reason why this has been so rewarding is that Steve is famous for many things, but among the things that he is most famous for is writing the most widely downloaded Harvard Business Review article of all time called Decoding the DNA of the Toyota Production System. So he wrote this in 1999, which was actually based on his doctoral dissertation that he did at the Harvard Business School. And part of that work, he actually worked on the factory floor of a Tier 1 Toyota supplier for 6 months. Right? And so over the years, he extended the work beyond just the high repetition work of manufacturing to engine design at Pratt & Whitney, to helping build the safety culture at Alcoa, studying the design and operations of all the nuclear reactors for the U.S. Navy seagoing fleet. And it has been so rewarding to see what is in common and see if we can explain all of these things with a very parsimonious theory. So we finally have a title of the book. So for those of you who were here for the workshop the day before the conference, you were able to see some of our early thinking on this. So the book finally has a name. It's called Wiring the Winning Organization, Unleashing Our Collective Greatness Through Slowification, Simplification, and Amplification. And this will be coming out in November of this year. And there was an excerpt of the book that was made available. And I'll admit the excerpt is a little bit smaller than I thought it would be because we're a little bit behind. It was not from lack of trying. So what I want to do is just share what I'd like to do in this session is share with you some of our goals, share with you two kind of vignettes that we think have just a tremendous explanatory power and help explain why some organizations have this magic of winning. So I'll share the first vignette, and then I'll turn over to Steve to share the second vignette and show how it fits into this bigger picture. So the observation that I'll make, and how am I doing here so far? Very good, Steve. So the observation I'll make is this. Winning organizations have this magic. They do extraordinary things, more than any single individual could do alone, and are able to fully unleash people's creativity and problem-solving capabilities. And so this is in contrast to organizations that have the exact opposite characteristics, where they constrain or even extinguish entirely the creativity and full problem-solving capabilities of people within them. So it's not just in DevOps and technology, but consider like two hospital emergency departments. In the first one, families are crowded into the emergency department waiting rooms. Worse, there's no movement. And when people finally get into the emergency department, there's patients waiting everywhere, in exam rooms, on chairs, on gurneys, in hallways, in those embarrassing hospital gowns. There's frustrated clinicians, right, that are describing how difficult it is to do their work. And if you're a patient sitting there, you would wonder, quite rightly, whether this is a great place to be treated, right? Maybe there's another hospital somewhere else where you should go. And that's not unfounded. But consider another hospital emergency department where the waiting area is nearly empty. It's not because they're not treating patients. It's the exact opposite. They're treating more patients. So every point is easy and seamless. They get registered immediately. They get signed in immediately. 80% of the patients are seen and get to go home because they're triaged. And the ones who have to get treated, the clinicians are focused on the patient and delivering care. And what's so remarkable about this is that this is the same hospital, same patients, same clinicians, same equipment, same floor space. They're identical in all ways except for how they are wired. And so what I've learned so much from Steve is, it's the management system that differentiates the two. And so in our world, in the state of DevOps research, right, we've seen the same dynamics where you have these elite performers versus the low performers. We've seen in this DevOps enterprise community, organizations go from, not great to great, right? Same people, same equipment, right, but radically different performance. And so I love this notion that the goal of science is to explain the most amount of observable phenomena using a fewest number of principles, confirm deeply held intuitions, and reveal surprising insights. And so our goal is to really put together a very simple theory of performance. And so just to show how simple, let's go through, I think, one of the most critical things that we've discovered. And it will come in this form of story of two people moving a couch. Let's call them Steve and Gene. And so you would think that this is all brawn work, but it actually requires an incredible amount of brain work. In order for there's actually a bunch of tough problems that need to be solved, which is where is the center of gravity? In order to get through a narrow doorway, around which axis should they rotate? To get down a narrow set of stairs, who should go first, and who should they be standing backwards or forwards? And what's astonishing is they can do this without bringing in a lot of consultants or study groups. The instant they pick up the couch, they're instantly communicating, coordinating, getting feedback, and they will be able to sense make and figure out how to move the couch together. They should be able to move the couch together successfully. And yet there are all the things that we can do as managers to make it very difficult for Steve and Gene to get their work done. We can turn the lights off, right? And suddenly this is not so easy anymore, especially going down the stairs. Or we can turn up the background noise, like a siren or loud music where they can't hear each other anymore. And this is actually difficult in a way that the first one isn't, right? The problems are more challenging, but they can no longer communicate or coordinate. Or we can put an intermediary between them where Steve and Gene aren't allowed to talk to each other directly. Instead, they have to go through this intermediary. And so all of these things result in making much more difficult to solve problems. It will take longer. The quality will be worse. And because it can no longer act as a unified whole. And so we heard about this so many times over the last day. So the big idea here is that these are two concepts. One is about coupling, right? So Steve and Gene moving a couch is a joint problem-solving cognitive activity. And there are so many things we can do to destroy their ability to work together. And this is different than Steve and Gene moving two chairs, which can actually be done independently. And so one of the big aha moments for me is that where possible, we want to decouple them. So a great example of decoupling is air traffic controllers and a commercial airline pilot. So they're sufficiently decoupled where the air traffic controllers can change shifts without permission from the pilots, and vice versa, because the information is so encoded, the protocols are so well known that we can hide information from each other. We can make changes on one side of the interface without notifying the other. And there's a whole bunch of domains where that's not possible. So I'd like to leave you with these two sort of exercises about like how powerful the couch is. Think about interactions in your organizations where you might be over-couched. This is when there isn't enough partitioning between teams, where in order to get anything done, like was mentioned earlier, you have to deal with 35 people because we're all stuck to the same couch. We also have to communicate, coordinate, prioritize, schedule together, deconflict, escalate, because we're all coupled to the couch. Or think about places where you're under-couched, where there's situations where you want to be able to get something done, but you don't have direct access to them. And so you spend an enormous amount of time trying to figure out, who needs to do something, who owes you something. You can't create connections on your own. And all you would like to do is just sit next to the person so you can solve a problem together, just like we see with ops and dev and so forth. So that is the role of the couch. So with that, Steve, over to you.
Thank you. Hey, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Gene. As Gene was saying, my research started about 30 years ago, deeply embedded inside Toyota. And the paradox we're trying to explain is that the auto industry is pretty much a level playing field where people have access to similar resources and IT systems and capital equipment and so on and so forth. They're trying to find and meet needs in the same sort of competitive space. And yet, despite all that level playing field qualities, the differences in performance are extraordinary. And we were trying to understand the paradox with Toyota, twice as productive, defect rates 1/1000th time to market, 1/2 relative to everybody else. And as Gene said, I had this chance to embed sort of Karate Kid inside the Toyota system for an extended period. And when we went in, we may have thought that this was a technology issue. Access to better equipment, but that wasn't the true. Access to better programming, production control algorithms. Turned out that wasn't true. What we discovered is that day in, day out, when someone went into one of these Toyota plants or supplier plants, the conditions were much, much better for individuals to solve the hard technical problems in front of them. And it was much easier for groups of people to collaborate on the solving of hard technical problems that were in front of them. And this was certainly true in upstream styling and design and that sort of thing, both of the product and the process. But even day to day, the number of problems that occur in a manufacturing environment are somewhere close to infinite. And in the Toyota environment, they just get digested and processed in a regular routine kind of fashion, almost as easy as actually turning a bolt with a wrench. And in other places, every problem seems to generate chaos and confusion. And so, to Gene's point about this idea of people being coupled, attached to the same problem and having to coordinate their collaborative efforts versus being decoupled, we started to realize that within that system, there were a lot of tactics and strategies used to break the big problems of designing things and running things into smaller and smaller problems so that people's intellectual horsepower can be engaged not only more productively individually, but be engaged simultaneously. So what we want to do is take you through a very small vignette, which, very, very simple, sort of captures some of the ideas of breaking very big problems down into much more manageable pieces. Not only are the pieces themselves more manageable, they can be processed simultaneously. So the vignette we'll set up is, hypothetically, let's say Marguerite, Gene's wife, and my wife Miriam are asked by a friend to help in the refurbishment of a hotel in rural Maine. And the purpose here is that this hotel will be refurbished and be used as for the purpose of non-charitable activities. People can come for a therapeutic session, so on and so forth. And they say, Gene and Steve, while we're trying to help design this refurbishment, we're in rural Maine and we don't have access to skilled trades. If you guys could line up folks to do the painting, the interior work on the hotel, and just to clear out furniture and restage furniture when we're done, that would be very helpful. So at first, Steve and Gene are sort of overly optimistic or unappreciative of the difficulty of this. So they do hire movers and painters who can relocate to rural Maine for some period. And then they just sort of let people have at it. And certainly within the first few hours is chaos because the painters are in rooms that the movers haven't cleared out. The movers are trying to go into rooms where the painters aren't showing up. The movers have cleared out rooms and think it's time to put the furniture back in place, but the painters aren't done. And it's just chaos. So then Gene and Steve, pull out their laptops and whatever software they have, and they say, what we need to do is schedule this thing. And they started giving a direction, you go to this room, you go to that room, da-da-da. And what they find out within about an hour, for all the precision of their schedule, is chaos again. And the reason it's chaos again, and I'm sure you all encounter this in your normal work, is that no amount of scheduling, and certainly not done by these two guys on a laptop in rural Maine in a rush, is going to be precise enough to account for every contingency. And that's just in a static fashion, let alone the dynamic stuff that happens. So then they still kind of stick into the strategy of creating a schedule. So they say, well, we've got a more precise schedule, but what we're going to do now is expedite. So if there's difficulty in clearing the furniture out or refurbishing one room over here, we'll grab other people and move them around and get the paint and get the plaster and get the brushes and the drop cloths and this and that. And it turns out that fails too. Again, because whatever expediting and sort of patching they're trying to do in terms of where people are, in terms of actually patching the walls in the hotel, that's an inadequate solution to the fact that the schedule itself is a very bad way to coordinate people in a complex dynamic environment. And at that point, there's, fortunately, I wouldn't call it a rebellion. There's constructive feedback from the painters and the movers, where they say something to the effect, very gently and politely, you guys are idiots. Why are you trying to schedule the entire hotel when the hotel is broken up into rooms? And each room is idiosyncratic. It's an old building and whatnot. But just put us into teams. Some movers, some painters in this room, some movers and some painters in that room, some movers and some painters. And that immediately makes things easier because no longer are they trying to coordinate across all the movers and all the painters. They've taken this approach of sort of partitioning or modularizing this hotel down into smaller pieces where there are fewer people who have to communicate with each other at the same time about the same problem. And so that kind of helps things move along a little bit. And as they continue this, then now that the movers and the painters can be in the same place at the same time, no longer dependent on the schedule that Gene and Steve have tried to generate, what they can then do is say, well, guys, before we just all pile in there trying to move a couch while you're trying to set up a ladder or trying to move a chair out of the way while you're trying to put a drop cloth, why don't we just partition this even further into phases? There's a clear out the room phase. There's a prep and paint and plaster and all of that phase. And then when all of that stuff is ready for the movers to come back in, there's a put the furniture back in place phase. You see what they figured out how to do is take the problem of the room, which is much smaller than the problem of the hotel, and partition it into smaller pieces of phases. And now what you have is even fewer people who have to collaborate and coordinate their problem-solving efforts with each other because they've broken this hotel down to room, down to phase. So it's already going more smoothly. Now something else is going on here, which is now with this partitioning room by room by room, is you've basically separated, decoupled, like Gene was talking about with the couch. You've taken this massive problem where everyone's hands are attached all at once, all at the same time, into much smaller pieces of work. Now, there's something else going on here, is that now that they've partitioned this big problem into many more smaller pieces, there's still this issue of having people solve problems and solve problems in conditions that are more conducive to solving problems than not. And the painters especially have this problem because they go in, and this is an old building. It's made out of wood. It's about 100, 150 years old. They go in, and there's new plaster. There's old plaster. The old plaster has to be treated differently than the new plaster. There's wood that has to be stained, and staining is a pain in the butt because you got to come up with the right mixes and formulations. And trying to get all of that problem solving done while they're actually still trying to refurbish the room becomes impossible because on the one hand, there's the speed at which they have to prep and paint or prep and stain, and then there's the speed at which they can actually solve the problems related to prepping and staining and painting, and those are out of sync with each other. And so what they say is, wait, hold on a second. Not only do we have to partition this system into smaller and smaller pieces, we have to give ourselves an opportunity to solve problems in a slower environment than a fast-moving environment. And this ties into how our brains work, right? Which is when we're locked in, we're dependent on habits, routines, muscle memory that we've already pretty much ingrained in ourselves. But when we're facing a situation which is novel, which is new, where we don't have a pre-existing habit or routine, we have to develop a new one, and that takes some time. And so what the painters and movers realize, and this is true for the movers also on how to move, wardrobes, which are awkward and heavy and have loose hinges, is that by giving themselves opportunity to solve problems offline before they step into the performance environment, they're also better equipped. And this certainly helps a ton. Now, there's another issue here. And again, it gets back to Gene's issues of coupling and decoupling. Because if you think about his example of chairs and couches, much easier to be asked to move a chair where you don't have to coordinate with another person than to move a couch where there's all this problem solving that has to go on either before or during. And so now Gene and Steve, with the help of the movers and the painters, have taken this big problem of hotel down to the problem of room, down to the problem of phases, and then even within the phases, they've also done even more subdivision about this wall versus that wall versus the ceiling versus the trim by the painters, or this piece of furniture versus that piece of furniture by the movers. And then they've given themselves another advantage of doing problem solving offline when they can be thoughtful and deliberate and reflective rather than hurried and fast like that. There's another issue that comes up, which is still things go wrong. And again, that happens with moving and painting, and certainly happens in things of more complex and more challenging. And at first, Gene and Steve, think they're going to be helpful. And the way they're going to be helpful is they'd say, hey, Anna, you're working in room 2, but you're not doing anything right now. Go help room 1. And immediately, there's an obvious difficulty and then a protest from the folks in room 2, which is, wait a second, Anna might not be doing something right at this particular moment, but we need her in the next particular moment. And if you pull her into room 1, then the problems they're having there are going to start bleeding over into our room because Anna's no longer available. And this whole notion of getting Anna's help, Gene and Steve thought it would be helpful, but inadvertently what they did is they recoupled the system. Because now the problems are linking room 1 to room 2 to room 3 to room 4. And they realize another necessary strategy here is that when you're having any work being done, that you have to have quote-unquote slack resources. Not to insult Anna by saying that she's a slacker, but she's the slack resource who's an expert who can step into the moment of actually a more difficult problem than the team is already dealing with and pick up that extra burden to locally stabilize the situation without having it spill over to other parts of the situation. Anyway, as far as this hotel example goes, well, we started as we started working this through, and again, it's simple. It's Gene and Steve managing, a few dozen people on a fairly simple project in the scheme of things. But what we found is that we started reflecting on our experiences over the last 20, 30 years each, that every program or every project we've been involved in, and I can't list all of Gene's, but mine in manufacturing, heavy industry, drug development, et cetera, it all had these qualities of an overly coupled system that didn't allow people to step back and do slow thinking, slow, deliberative, creative thinking, and that when it started running, problems started bleeding over and recoupling the system. So as we start thinking through how this all comes together, is that too often, we put people in a difficult situation, what we've been calling in this book, a danger zone, where we ask them to solve problems in environments which are fast-moving, which is not conducive to being reflective and that sort of thing. The stakes are very high, maybe even hazardous. There's not opportunity to get multiple cycles of learning, so we really can't learn. We just do and then discover whether or not we've succeeded or failed. And the problems we're trying to solve are really, really tightly coupled and consequently highly complex. The whole hotel rather than a particular piece of a phase within a particular room. And when we start looking at organizations that are really successful, what we find is that they're not only accidental, they're really deliberate at changing the conditions in which people have to solve problems. They break big things into smaller pieces, so sense-making is easier. They give people the opportunity to solve problems in slower-moving environments rather than in faster-moving environments. Because of all of that, they give opportunity to have iterative learning, multiple cycles versus not, and the stakes of getting the wrong answer on the first try are very low relative to the actual performance environment. So anyway, these are some tactics that we're starting to develop in the book we wanted to reveal with this case study. And the last thing I'll ask as we go through this is we're still in the test drive phase. As Gene said, we have a paperback which represents about 1/5 our word count. So consider this a beta. And betas are wrong. And so please tell us how. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve.